When it comes to patterns of evolution, there are two patterns of evolution. Oh, whoops. And we'll look at micro and macro evolution over the next couple of days. Okay. But variation goes into this, being able to be fit to survive this environment, right? When two species evolve in different directions from a common point, it's called divergent evolution. Okay. We see this in a number of various different plants, especially, but we see it in a number of animals as well, potentially as well. But divergent looks at how they evolve in different directions. And we're going to look at micro and macro evolution, guys. And especially in macro evolution, this is where you're going to kind of see this a heck of a lot more. This is a much kind of bigger macro thing. It's very hard to see divergent evolution on a micro scale. It's seen over a course of millennia. Another pattern of evolution that is usually looked at to kind of put everything in its place. And when I mean put everything in its place, where it all fits in the grand scheme of things, which is what the Tree of Life project is. And I believe there's a slide here at the end that kind of looks at that. This looks at, again, comparative anatomy is going to be a huge thing when it comes to, ultimately deciding that in DNA. And we talked about this earlier. Two different phenotypes evolve independently from one another, but, basically kind of evolve in the same realm. Wings of a bat and insects would be a classic example of that. There are some other models out there, guys, when it comes to evolution. Darwin's model, common descent. We have scientific evidence that's concrete, that you can hold, that you can test. Okay. There are some other ones. There's a static model that's out there. And I put this down here. I'm not going to have you explain what these models are. I may have a multiple question or two about these things, but I'm not going to have you explain the static model. It says the Earth is less than 10,000 years old and nothing has changed. What it's based on, you can look at radiographic dating. You can look at fossils. You can carbon-14 them. And you can see that they're much older than that. So, we can reject that one. Transformation model says that species arise separately, but then evolve over time to adapt. It doesn't fit into an anatomical. It doesn't fit into biochemical. Again, looking at DNA and seeing the genetic differences, you can see where something just doesn't pop up all of a sudden out of the ground. There's this model of separate types. It says that species do evolve and produce new species, but the different types of organisms had separate ancestors. Again, the big thing with a lot of the stuff is DNA. Stuff that we can structurally look at. Stuff that can be tested. Stuff that can be validated. Okay. The only theory that can explain all of this life, and this is the Tree of Life project, okay, is descent with common ancestry, looking at all of Darwin's stuff, biogeography, comparative anatomy, embryology, and then the stuff that Darwin didn't know, DNA, biochemistry. And it's that DNA and biochemistry that we can really use to give us a lot of huge insight into what we are looking at here today. Let me see. Let me make sure if this works. I'm sorry about that other one. Okay. I'm going to play this here. So I'm going to stop share because you guys can't see what I'm looking at. All right. Let me get this pulled up here. Let me pull up something else real quick. Bear with me, guys. Let me hit pause here. All right, here we go. Please, God, work.
After 50 years, the faces have changed. The places have changed.
Amazing!
The world has changed.
How about that? Indescribable.
But our mission to bring you the stories that amaze and enlighten remains the same.
This is for science.
Thanks for your support and stay tuned. After 50 years, we're just getting started.
One of the most significant events in our distant past is still perhaps the greatest mystery, the origins of life itself. How did it all get started? If you look down the evolutionary tree of life, you'll see that we mammals branched from reptiles, which branched from fish, and so on, all the way down to the base of the tree. A common ancestor, some single-celled organism billions of years ago. But what came before that? And where did the very first living thing come from? Correspondent Chad Cohen digs down deep into the roots of the tree and uncovers some groundbreaking research into how life first began.
Everything on Earth that has ever lived came from an ancient ancestor billions of years ago. Perhaps a simple single-celled organism like this. But from where did it come? From where did the first life emerge?
Life emerged from chemistry. After that, it's just details, right?
So at the root of the tree of life, it appears, is chemistry. Simple elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. But how did they get cooked together into the complex molecules of life?
We're here on the planet, and we must be here as a result of organic chemistry.
John Sutherland from the University of Manchester, England, along with co-authors Matt Pauner and Beatrice Gerland.
Beatrice Gerland?
Gerland.
Okay.
He and his team took on the task of looking for the holy grail of life.
You know what you want to make, but you don't have a recipe.
We can all imagine what this is like. In the kitchen, we bring together different ingredients all the time to make all kinds of different things. It's the recipe, though, that makes it all work. Take, for example, the cream puff.
Oh, yeah, pâte à choux?
Okay, pâte à choux as it's known in French. In this case, I know the ingredients. Flour, eggs, milk, water, butter. What I don't know is the recipe. So I might just try mixing all these things together. And baking them. I could try different orders, different combinations, different amounts. But what you get is not pâte à choux. Too brittle, too hard, well, I have no idea.
Attempts to find the recipe for early life are unsuccessful too, even though researchers knew the basic ingredients.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobel laureate Jack Szostak and his team at Massachusetts General Hospital say that early life needed two things.
You need the cell membrane.
A container, something to live in and keep other things out.
And you need some genetic material, something that can allow the inheritance of information.
Every modern creature uses DNA to do that. It's an organism's instruction manual, genetic code, spelled out in chemicals inside this twisty double helix. DNA has long been hailed as the fundamental molecule of life. We also have RNA as well, usually described as DNA's helper. But now it turns out, RNA has a starring role.
Years ago, RNA was kind of a bit player in the cell. Now our picture is completely invert it. We think RNA is really the important thing.
RNA has a genetic code also written with chemicals: A, C, G, and U. They're used to help build the proteins that make up the cells in our bodies: skin, hair, brain cells, the heart. RNA helps make them all. So what's the recipe for RNA? It's made from 3 parts: a sugar, a phosphate, and a single letter of the genetic code, a base. Each of these parts is made up of simple chemicals that existed on the early Earth, but nobody has been able to put them together. That is, until John Sutherland came along.
We were the guys who stood back and looked at it in a different way.
It's one thing to make chemicals in the lab, but there were no labs on the early Earth. So Sutherland tried to replicate the conditions, in some ways simulate what that Earth would have been like.
Simulate the actual chemistry that took place.
Starting with their version of what Charles Darwin suggested as the perfect spot for the source of life: a warm little pond.
The pond itself is actually the little round-bottomed flask.
And because it was a warm little pond,
It's around about the temperature of a cup of English tea.
sounds nice. And so they tackled the problem at hand, trying to make RNA. Knowing what chemicals it would take, the question was how to cook them together. People have known the ingredients for some time now, but the recipe has not been really working out.
You actually have to be the person that writes the recipe book.
So that means we have to go back to the kitchen and try to combine our ingredients for pot au choux in a new way. Remember the ingredients: eggs, milk, flour, water, and butter. We combined them before with no luck. But now we have a real chef to help us.
Well, you had the right ingredients.
Right.
You forgot one very important step. It's that intermediate step.
Chef Richard Coppage of the Culinary Institute of America explains that I was missing an all-important intermediate step.
You didn't pre-cook the mixture.
I can't just mix these things together and bake it.
No,
And actually,
because that's why you have this.
so pre-cooked. What does it mean to pre-cook something?
Some of the ingredients need to be cooked together first.
This is the intermediate step.
That you didn't do earlier.
Yeah.
I first cook the water, milk, butter, and flour together. No eggs. Then
Take it to the mixer. Now you can add the egg.
Okay, now, finally, okay.
and you get just the right mixture.
All right, that's ready to be baked.
The result,
They look perfect. Without that intermediate step of pre-cooking, you really don't have pot au choux. It's not much of anything without that intermediate pre-cooking step.
Right. And apparently, that was the problem scientists were having with RNA, trying to combine all the parts together. And that's not the way to do it.
No, it's not.
So Sutherland's team took their own intermediate step. First, they created a hybrid made of a sugar and only half of the base, the part that holds the genetic code. This intermediate substance came together in the flask through the simple process of evaporation.
It looks like a smear or a smudge on the inside of the flask.
On the early Earth, the intermediate would have formed through evaporation, made its way up into the atmosphere, and then fallen from the sky.
So this would come down in rain, or if the temperature was cold, it would precipitate out as solid particles and fall to the ground, almost like a kind of organic snow.
And as in the lab, meeting up with the remaining chemicals in perhaps another warm little pond, and attaching together in the final step. And it worked. For the first time, scientists created a building block of RNA, what's called a ribonucleotide, containing the base C. In hindsight, pretty simple.
It never occurred to me to try putting them together in a different order, so it was not obvious.
It was, in fact, an amazing accomplishment.
Because if you take the right mix of ingredients in the right order with the right set of conditions, you can cook a nice piece of pastry. I can make a ribonucleotide.
And it came together in simple steps that could have taken place on their own on the early Earth.
My team and I have recreated an early Earth scenario and let it run. And the chemistry just does it on its own.
But that wasn't all. They took their piece of RNA and subjected it to something else easy to come by on the early Earth.
Light.
Yes, sunlight.
And so if you hit the switch, you'll see what happens when the sun shines.
something amazing happens. The light shining upon their sample turns some of the C bases, the bit that makes up the genetic code, into U's.
So 2 for the price of 1, just by having the sunshine.
They had discovered a natural pathway to 2 of the 4 letters of RNA, letters that code for the proteins that build all living things.
We were pretty happy, actually.
Understatement?
No, they were happy. I would never say the contrary, but in an English way.
We might have had a trip to a local pub.
And so, while we're a long way from figuring out exactly how life got started,
They've really, I think, solved one of the central hard questions in prebiotic chemistry.
they filled in a piece of that mysterious underside to the tree of life. Because as we trace our origins by looking down, chemists like Sutherland are seeing things in a different way.
What you see looking down from biology is what we see looking up from chemistry, and we can actually establish a link between the two.
A pathway from simple to more complex chemicals until chemistry becomes biology. They've given us a glimpse of where we come from.
This, how could you not be fascinated by this stuff? Here is, I'll put these links. The one in your, the one at the end of the lecture was to that video that we just watched. Here is another one, and I'll put this up on Blackboard if you're interested here. Just a multitude of various different things. The Age of Darwin. I haven't clicked on these in a while. And just a multitude of other different resources that you can go to if you're curious about it, or, you know, maybe you're like, you know, yes, a godlike creature came down and said, you know, let it happen. Maybe that's what you believe. That's fine. I'm not here to dissuade you from that. I don't really care, to be honest. But if you're on that side of the coin and you want to try to look in and see, you know, maybe you can find a hole in some of theirs with some of what you believe, then come here and look, okay? It never hurts to read something that you don't necessarily subscribe to. Getting a very good idea of what is and what isn't, or some stuff that you don't agree with, and seeing it from the other side, it's awesome. Here's also another one. This is the Smithsonian's website, guys. This one is fascinating here. There is a number of different things here and whatnot that you can kind of go and kind of play around with. But let's see here. I'm trying to see if I can find. Here's the some of the hominid. Here we go. The human family tree. Okay. And here is, there's us. We are here. Okay. And here's kind of our group. But here's, again, this is all kind of the human family tree here. And here's the Australopithecus group and various different family groupings right here. But, you know, going from, you know, here, I mean, you could see on this one here, I mean, there's such seeing some of these connections here, it is really hard to kind of, to really, you know, trying to see if you click on them. It gives you a great amount of information here. I mean, this is, you know, scientific journals, how they potentially survived. And again, you can get a lot of this by just You can get a sense of brain size and brain capacity because of that brain size, just by looking at the skull and the cranial vault. Okay. You can see the jaw size, and you can do DNA analysis of their teeth to see if you can see some remnants of some stuff that they chewed and ate on. And that's what they do a lot of with some of these various different things. You can click on a number of different things, and you could see various different fossils associated with all this. You can sort it alphabetically. You can sort it out by age. Okay. So these are kind of the older, and as we get closer here, obviously, let's see here. Yeah, this one's the Hobbit. This is one that they found not too long ago. Gives a time frame here, but you can see on the time frame there. I mean, you can see on the time frame that, you know, there were a number of Homo species existing at the same time. Why did ours happen to survive, and some of these others not? And there's a few interesting newer books out there kind of looking at that and questioning that, try to understand how we are the way we are, looking at brain development and why we went from a hunter-gatherer society to a agricultural-based society, and not moving around with the herds and where the game moved, but having a central city location, and why we did that and what drove that. Some fascinating books about that. If you're curious, I can see if I can go back and find the names of some of those books. But this is from the Smithsonian's website, and if you're interested in it, I know my boys were interested in it. You know, they were going through some stuff school-wise a few years back, and this, I mean, some questions, you know, still unanswered questions. That's the great thing about science, is like, stuff is, just because we have discovered the building blocks or the ability to build some of the basic building blocks of life does not mean we've figured it out. And just because we have a little bit of the picture does not mean that we have the whole picture here. And just, you know, seeing this tree here, and just, I mean, the millions of years between this group and this group. I mean, this is what's fascinating to me. Okay. This is what's just fascinating to me. But this is a great little website. Again, there's a ton, climate effects on human evolution. I mean, there is a ton of information looking at humans and how it affects the landscape, how that affects and drives evolutionary change, which is what micro and macro evolution really are in the grand scheme of things. Yes. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Okay. What's hot in human origins? Trying to see. I don't know. PBS, I believe, had the video on, or had a video on that find down in South Africa. I'll get the name of that and put that up on Blackboard for you guys as well, if you're curious to go watch that. It's just, I don't know. I get bored on a treadmill running, so I just watch random documentaries sometimes.